On October the 1st, 2012, Dr. Maddie Fox was appointed to the library board. And as hard as it is to believe, these 5 years have come and gone. And Dr. Fox is now rotating off the board at the end of September. Thank you, Dr. Fox, for your many contributions to the library. If you would come forward at this time, Tommy Lee Ivy, Supervisor from District 4, will make a presentation.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much. Come on around, Ms. Foster. I don't know that will be your last day today, and regardless, we might not let you go. If we got anything like the sheriff's department or the city chief, I'm gonna have you handcuffed, stay here. You've been doing such a good job. We understand sometimes it's time to go, but we will be missed around here because you're very active. And I hope we have somebody on your plate who can fulfill your duty. You have done a good job. I beg you to stay. Time, you must move on. And I almost said this, you've been trying to sell me a tape. You sound so good. You sound so good on the recorded tape. You've been trying to sell me one. And now I can't hear you sing around here. I'm going to come by your house and buy one of these tapes. I'm going to get this together. Resolution. Hear ye, all citizens of Lee County, Mississippi, by the proclamation of service for Miss Dr. Maddie Fox, who have faithfully served the citizens of Lee County through 5 years of service as a board member for the Lee County Library. According, it is proclaimed that Dr. Fox, delegate to this cause, is recognized by the board as a committed to being a valued citizen of Lee County. The board have ordered this signing this day, September the 18th, 2017. President Phil Morgan, Mike Smith, District 2, Tony Roberts, District 3, Billy Joe Holly, District 5, and your best supervisor, Tommy Lee Ivy, District 4. Thank you so much.
I also wanted to mention, just briefly, we're placing a copy of the Mississippi Encyclopedia in the Mississippi Room to commemorate your service on the library board.
Thank you, Jeff. I just want to say thank you, citizens of Lee County, and for our supervisor for asking me to serve. You know, it's an honor to be asked to serve. And I pray that I've done something that has been beneficial with my stay on the board. And there may be a time when I may want to come back or can come back, and I would so do so. Thank you.
Y'all may remember in 2016 that the library celebrated our 75th anniversary, and we recognized on September 2nd all of our current and former library board members. Well, we had a new library board member be appointed on October 1st, and at this time I would like Mrs. Patty Parks come forward, and Lee County Supervisor for District 2, 3, Tony Roper, to make a presentation to Mrs. Parks.
I hate to follow Tommy Lee.
Make it good.
Make it good.
Make it good.
Well, just we appreciate Patty what she's doing. She is a board member on the Lee County Library Board, and the Lee County Board of Supervisors and the people of Lee County just want to show you just a token of appreciation, and thank you for your work. And you put many years in, and I'm not going to tell everybody this, but she is my sister-in-law. But so. Yeah, we made this in solid gold, so you just save it from me.
Okay,
but thank you.
At this time, I'm going to ask actually both of my board members to come back up for just a second for a special presentation. Mrs. Helen Foster was one of our original library board members. Okay. Dr. Fox is going to get her notes. I have my notes. Everybody needs their notes. Okay, we're good. Okay, Mrs. Helen Foster was one of our original library board members. She was instrumental in the establishment of the Lee County Library and established the Helen Foster Lectures, which provide exceptional educational and informative programs in our community. To honor Mrs. Foster's efforts to strengthen public library service in our community, each year, the Library Board selects from nominated members of the community an individual to receive the Helen Foster Award for Library Advocacy. This year's recipient will be presented by Library Board members Dr. Fox and Mrs. Parks.
Thank you. Jeff has stolen some of my thunder, so I'll just go ahead with the award, since you know what it's about and how it got started. And I would like to just say this year's recipient is definitely one who has actively supported the library with her time, talents, and gifts. She's been described as being dependable, efficient, unfailingly proficient, and compassionate. Her record of service speaks volume to this community of learners. She volunteered her services with the Friends of the Lee County Library Board from 1993 through March of 2010. The Lee-Itawamba Library System Board of Trustees from April 2010 to September 2013. And she served again on the Friends Board from October 13th to April 4, 2017. Ladies and gentlemen, this comes to about 24 years of dedicated service. Lest I keep you in suspense any longer, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Lee County Library System Administrative Board of Trustees, and of course each of you, may I present the 2017 Helen Foster Award for Library Advocacy and Support recipient, Julie Battle.
I am really honored to receive this award. I've spent a lot of time in this library, and I think a lot of my friends and all my family know that the three most important things to me in my life are my faith, my family, and my library. That was always one of the things we checked out when we moved, whenever my husband would be transferred. Do they have a good library? Do they have a good school system? You know, you just do that for your family. But to be honored by one of my priorities is just beyond anything I can say. I appreciate it so much, and I thank everyone for supporting the library, being here today, and please know what a gem you have in this library. A wonderful staff, a great director, and please just be behind us all the time. We're here for you. Thank you.
All right, so I'm finished now, and I'm going to turn things over to our chairwoman, but I do want to say before I go, what a pleasure it's been to work with all the Tupelo Reads committee members, including especially our chair lady, Lisa Reed, and all the friends of the library. Thank you very much for supporting this event.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and congratulations, Julie. You're inspiring to all of us. So it's nice that Tupelo Reads is around this library, which is sort of the center of learning in Tupelo, and that we can honor a great volunteer at the same time. So hello, everyone, and welcome to the 7th annual meeting of Tupelo's Citywide Book Club. Tupelo Reads, we're all on the same page. From our inaugural book, Tuesdays with Maury, to Gilead, to My Dog Skip, to Forrest Gump, to The Tilted World, to My Last Season, and to this year's selection, Dispatches from Pluto. It's been our goal to provide an opportunity for Tupelo readers to explore different literary themes and genres, to be enlightened by the book's author or an expert, and have a community-wide conversation about a book. And I do believe that this book has created the most buzz that we have had in 7 years. Once again, the Tupelo Reads Committee has selected the book and produced the events around it. There was a summer session at the Boys and Girls Club, and I must give special props to committee member Bonnie Webb, English teacher who has devised and taught a curriculum for the last 7 years to these 6th graders at the Boys and Girls Club. That's good. Pertaining to the book, and I will say that those students know where Pluto is. It is near Chula. They can find it on a map. They know who Richard is. They know Richard. And they understand the culture shock he experienced in moving from New York City to the Mississippi Delta. And consummate English teacher that she is, Bonnie always has writing and grammar exercises that pertain to the book, and a couple of them were hard. I had a little trouble with the compound subject and predicate verb agreement, but anyway, it was really a good 4-day session, and I appreciate her efforts. The rest of the committee has worked hard too. They all pitch in. It's a great group. We meet and everybody does their job, so it's just a pleasure. And I'm going to have them stand. But we sponsored an art show at Tupelo High School, and you see the winners, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd there. They get cash prizes. And I hope many of you got to come to our sold-out Pluto party at the Ice House last night. It was so much fun. And our author has already spoken to English classes at the high school this morning. So thanks to our committee for planning and implementing all of that, really making it happen. And I want you all to stand up and don't be shy, just wave your hand. Sonia, they're scattered all around. Julie Gibbons, Mary Ann, Babe Gratz, Carol Pitts, Jack, Evie Story, Liz McIntosh, Betsy White, everybody work, and it's just a pleasure to work with them. Many of them have served 7 years. The idea of Tupelo Reads evolved from a vision set forth for Tupelo to be known within and without as a center of lifelong learning. That vision has been carried forth by these volunteers and our financial underwriters, the City of Tupelo, the Lee County Library, Friends of the Library, and Reed's Gumtree Bookstore. So many thanks to these sponsors and to all of you for supporting us another year. Now, with no further ado, I will call on, dispatch, another Pluto committee member who will introduce the introducer of our speaker.
Well, good morning, or good afternoon now, as of 1 minute ago. We have, the sound is on, sound is off. On, off, scratchy. Well, we'll do the best we can. I'm sorry about that. Those of you, probably everybody in this room, certainly knows of Steve Holland, and he has made no secret that he's had some health challenges this year. And so I thought I would take a minute of personal privilege on behalf of the community to have the opportunity to publicly say a few things about Steve before he says a few things about his good friend Richard Grant. The Lee County Library has not had a better friend than Steve Holland. Personally served as a young lad on the farm by our bookmobile, he has always felt a debt of gratitude to our library, and he has repaid that debt tenfold with his time and his talents as a citizen and as a legislator. The thousands of families who have fallen into and through our human services safety net have not had a better friend than Steve Holland, and he has fought to make that safety net stronger and wider. The thousands of families fighting the hard battle of mental health challenges have had no better friend than Steve Holland. In short, the least and the lost have never had a better friend in Mississippi State House than Representative Steve Holland. In his business as one of the South's premier undertakers and famed directors, funeral directors, Steve is known for his compassion and his undying respect, if you can use the word undying for a funeral director, his undying respect for the families that he serves. And he is unsurpassed as an author of obituaries and eulogist. I almost hoping that I die before Steve in case he could be called on, but then I'm not sure. Although, Steve, you're looking healthier all the time, so I may not wish that yet. Finally, he is a delightful, outlandish friend to all. And in Willie Morris's eulogy, Governor William Winters said that, quote, Willie woke up every morning with the sole idea of how he could have fun that day. I don't know anyone who has succeeded in having fun himself and bringing that much joy to others every day that I introduce her. So please help me show Steve how much we appreciate and love him as he introduces our esteemed author, Richard Grant, today.
My goodness. Tommy, Tony, people, I feel so good today, I may just have one more term in me. We'll see. We'll see. My sole purpose here today is to introduce a very, very good friend of mine, and I'm going to do that as best I can. But I do have one editorial comment, maybe two. I don't know what this community would do without Jack and Lisa Reed and their families. They are beyond benevolent. They are learned. They put good things together. And quite frankly, you Baptists, they throw a hell of a party. So thank you. Thank you so much for that. Number two, and Jack mentioned it, I've even had the opportunity to address the National Library Association convention with 5,000 people in it before in my life. I don't know of any institution along the way. I'm a public school person all the way, and I'm proud of that. All you teachers, I'm proud of you. All of you educators, I'm very proud of you. But when Miss Birdie Patton rolled into our cotton patch 3 miles south of Plantersville when I was 5 years old, bowled off that 1948 bookmobile and looked at my mama and said, Miss Sadie, I'm here to teach your boys to read. That was the hallmark of my learning in my life, and I owe it all to the Lee County Library and its system of opportunities for all of our people, and I'm going to undyingly fight for that right. And you Board of Supervisors members, we're proud of Lee County. We're proud of the work you do. But there's more than a jail that has needs in this county, I promise you that. Just look how many people you'll make happy in 2019. Woo! Come on, I feel the Spirit coming on me. The first book, I believe, was American Nomads. The second one was Crazy River. Crazy River was second. You may not have read that. The third one was God's Middle Finger, and it's nothing to offend any of you people about religion or anything. It's just a kinky title he chose. And then the one we really like is Dispatches from Pluto. Now, I must tell you, I read Dispatches, and I read and read and read, and then all of a sudden I got to that part that talked about the deranged mortician from Tupelo. At which point I said, what the hell? That guy has never even met me. So Richard can tell you, I got on the phone and I said, hey brother, it's time for you to come to Plantersville and meet me. And he did, and we have become absolute best friends. And now I'm riding around all over Mississippi in the South with him, showing him places like Natchez, which is his next work. He loves Mississippi. It took him a long time to get here, but he got here as soon as he could, and I'll be darned if I don't believe he's going to stay because he likes it. Richard Grant, great author.
All right, look at you people out there. It's wonderful to see you all. It's wonderful to be here. I have to say, I've had a kind of a rough time looking at these failing high schools in the Mississippi Delta and in Jackson and in Natchez. It was so refreshing to go to your high school this morning and see what appeared to be a healthy, successful, highly functioning school. I wish the whole state had more of them, but it was so refreshing to be there. I got grilled by the kids. They gave me very difficult questions. Steve mentioned that it took me a while to get to Mississippi. A lot of people often ask me, how does a guy from London, England, end up in a place called Pluto, Mississippi? And I usually say something like, well, it was a long and winding road. Or I guess I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere. But we have a little time here, so I was just thinking I might trace back the road that brought me here. And the first thing I knew of Mississippi was, let me think, if you can picture a classroom full of English schoolboys in grey blazers, all damp from the rain with the kind of smell of wet wool, and the rain coming down outside, and it was a new English class, and they brought out this book, As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. And that was really the first time I came across Mississippi, and we were pretty impressed by that book. There was a lot we didn't understand in it, including that some of the Mississippi vernacular we were puzzled by. And then we went on to read Light in August by William Faulkner. And I remember this, the book opens with a woman who's walked to Jefferson County, Mississippi, all the way from Alabama, and Faulkner says she'd walked to Fur Peace, spelled F-U-R. And these English schoolboys, me included, were sitting in this classroom. Well, what does this mean? It's obviously a measurement of distance of some kind, but what does it have to do with a piece of fur? Never once imagining that I would end up in Mississippi knowing exactly what that means. And then I was always a music guy, and then I guess the next reference to Mississippi that came up is kind of bound up in my first teenage love affair. My girlfriend and I got hold of a copy of the Sun Sessions by Elvis Presley, and I read on the back of the thing that he's from a place called Tupelo, Mississippi, and I was thinking about the William Faulkner books I'd read, and some stuff has come out of this place. And then through working my way back through the history of rock and roll and soul music and funk music, I found my way back to the Delta Blues. I was about 21 years old, and I had this thing for Son House. He had this song, I want to be a Baptist preacher so I won't have to work. And I kind of got it, but I've come to understand that sentiment a little better since moving here. So the picture that it formed in my young British mind was a place of great power and strangeness, but with these kind of dark, violent undertones and this racial obsession that we didn't really understand, like why it was so fierce, especially in these Faulkner books. And it was a place that, yeah, it had a kind of a mystique to me when I lived in England, but wasn't necessarily a place that I wanted to go, or certainly never expected to end up living in. My main ambition as a young man was to get out of England and see the world. So I got myself a history degree, and then I got a job as a security guard and a janitor, and I saved up all my money. And jobs were hard to find in London at that point, especially with a history degree. So yeah, I worked 2 jobs for about a year and saved up money, and I got myself to New York City, and then a friend of mine there had a father in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I spent a summer painting houses there and had a little money and drove to California, then went to New Orleans. And in New Orleans, I got robbed and was homeless for a few weeks on the streets. Well, it was a lot more difficult to kind of get money around the world in those days. My parents had some for me, but it took a while to get it sent to me. So I would spend my days by the swimming pool in the Marriott Hotel using my British accent to pretend that I was a guest, and at night I would sleep in the parking lot of the hotel. And for money, I was kind of on the streets, and the homeless people were very kind to me on the whole, and helped me find food and Mad Dog 2020 wine as well. But while I was spending my days at the pool at the Marriott in New Orleans, I started writing these long letters about my experiences in America back to friends in England. One of those friends had started working for a magazine. He said, "Look, if you clean this up a bit, I can publish it and pay you money." Wow, I thought. That was really how I became a writer. Kind of like most things in my life, I kind of stumbled into it by accident. So I then turned myself into a kind of traveling freelance journalist. I was selling stories to magazines, and I was traveling. I ended up kind of basing myself in Tucson, Arizona. I liked the big skies after the little cramped English skies, and it was cheap to live, and it was close to Mexico. And this book, God's Middle Finger, which sounds like a terrible blasphemy, I know, but it's about this mountain range in northwest Mexico, right below the American border, called the Sierra Madre, that's basically like a Wild West that sits on America's back doorstep. And it has 4 canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon, and it still has Native American tribes, some of whom live in caves and hunt with bows and arrows. I'm talking about 2011. I went down there to write a book. The title, there's a people called the Tarahumara tribe who live down in these big canyons, and they have this Easter festival. They picked up some Catholicism from some Jesuits that came through there about 200 years ago and left, and they kind of melded that with what they had of their own religion and produced these Easter festivities. And they have mock battles between Pharisees and soldiers, and they take their clothes off and they paint themselves in black and white stripes, and they shake these wooden AK-47s with rattles, and they drink a lot of corn beer, and they have these, like I say, mock battles. It was mayhem, fires everywhere, scratchy violin music. And in the middle of this, they went into the church, which had a cross on, and also had a row of human skulls at the back of the church, and they produced this statue. And they brought it out into the middle of the melee. I said, "Who's that?" And they said, "Es Dios, it's God." And I noticed that God had his hands up like this, but over the years, all of God's fingers had broken off, apart from one. So that's where the title came from. I didn't mean to blaspheme. I have to say, I never really thought much about Mississippi during the 1980s and 1990s until I was driving around in Tucson, Arizona, and I heard a song by Junior Kimbrough, who's a hill country blues guy from near Holly Springs. I think Tullahoma is his hometown. And I'd be used to the Delta blues, and always like that. This was a completely different kind of blues. It was a kind of driving, hypnotic blues that just stayed in one chord and kind of cast a spell on me. And I went and bought the album. And then I found out that 2 college kids in a place called Oxford, Mississippi, which, wait, wasn't that Faulkner's town? I thought to myself, had managed to get $1 million in debt recording Hill Country Bluesmen. I thought, that's got to be a magazine story. So I got myself a commission from the Daily Telegraph in London to go and find out how these two college kids had managed to get $1 million in debt recording these septuagenarian and octogenarian bluesmen in Mississippi. So I got to Oxford, Mississippi. Had kind of a weird experience at a party that evening. There was an insurance salesman named Jim Mize. Anybody know? He's a singer-songwriter, sells crop insurance in Arkansas. Jim Mize. I'll never forget his face, or the size of his head. So in the middle of this party, I went up to him and I said, we'd been hanging out earlier. I said, Jim, can I bum a smoke off you? I used to smoke cigarettes in those days. And he just whipped out a rusty pocket knife and jammed it into the crotch of my jeans. And I had no idea why. And he just glared at me and then folded up his knife and stomped off. And I asked the people next to me, I was like, what on earth was that about? And they just said, he's from Arkansas. Like that, but that was the only explanation I got. So I felt like I'd stepped sideways into a new kind of reality. But I also, I found my way to Square Books, and I met Richard and Lisa Howarth, and I went and interviewed the bluesmen, and went up to Junior Kimbrough's juke joint, and interviewed R.L. Burnside, and wrote the story. And I just kept coming back to Oxford. It was something about the way of life there just seemed to sit well with me. I think it was just that kind of warm repartee and these incredible stories that just kept rolling out of people's mouths about things that sounded, interesting to them and sounded just sort of otherworldly to me. And I made friends there, and like a lot of writers, I have demons in my head sometimes. And when my life just seemed to be going wrong, I would make sure I got to Oxford, Mississippi, and a week there just seemed to set me straight somehow. What happened next? My connection to Mississippi. Oh yeah, my first marriage. I'm not going to tell you why that went wrong. All I'm going to tell you is that my first marriage kind of exploded, and I had nowhere to live. And my friend Bruce in Oxford, Mississippi said, well, I have a trailer in Water Valley. You can spend the summer there, and I won't charge you any rent. But there's just one thing you need to know, that a lot of these blues guys are going to be staying in the trailer with you. And I said, well, that's fine. I'm heartbroken. They're bluesmen. Maybe I can learn something. So yeah, I spent a summer in a trailer in the woods on the edge of Water Valley, next to the Fat Possum Records recording studio, and the most frequent guest there was T. Model Ford. I don't know if any of you've come across him, and he had a drummer who was mentally challenged named Spam, and there was another guy named Paul Wine Jones, Winehead, I guess was his. And they would stay in there a lot, and they saw that I was kind of torn up and heartbroken, and they took it upon themselves to give me advice. They didn't like to see a man brought down so low by a woman, and I liked the idea of getting advice from these guys, but I found their advice sort of problematic to follow. Paul Wine Jones kept telling me that I needed to get up to this whorehouse in Memphis, and that if I had enough money, that place would fix any man's blues. And then Spam would hold up his hand and said he told me I need to steer clear of sporting women, because he held up his hand and all his fingertips were missing, and apparently a crack whore named Francine had sliced off his fingertips with a box cutter. And T-Model said, and you're still going out with her. But me and T-Model became good friends. I mean, he had the roughest life imaginable. But he had a strange gift. He could force himself to be happy, even though his life had been a kind of parade of violence and tragedy. Most people can't do that. He just said, I don't let nothing get me down. Most people can't do that, but he could. Somebody else described him as a happy-go-lucky psychopath. But anyway, we got to know each other pretty well, and then fast forward a few years, I'm living with my girlfriend Mariah from Arizona in a 425 square foot apartment in Manhattan, with a little strip of light here, and the rest of the place is just a cave. In that strip of light, you could see people's legs walking past. If someone had like a little Pomeranian or a Chihuahua, you could see the whole dog. But normally you just see the dog legs walking by, and our dog was really depressed. She would just lay around on the floor of the apartment, and I came to New York with kind of big dreams. I'd made a documentary for the BBC based on my first book. I had some money for the first time in my life. I was like, let's go to New York and live just for a year, just to have done it. And I had another documentary in the works. I had a book proposal in the works. I had a commission from the New Yorker magazine, and I had a steady writing gig with a magazine in England. And within 3 weeks of arriving in New York, that magazine folded. The documentary project collapsed. The New Yorker rejected the story I'd written, and I had no work. And Mariah, my then girlfriend, she couldn't even find a job making coffee in a cafe. We had the money was, the city was just eating our savings up at a terrifying rate, and I had this sense that the city was just like gnawing on my skull at night. And then I got invited to the Oxford conference of the book in Oxford, Mississippi. And I was like, great, it's like exactly what I need is some Mississippi. And so I went down to the conference, and my friend Martha Foose, the cookbook writer who I'd got to know in Oxford, have anybody read her cookbooks? What is it? Screen Doors and Sweet Tea? A southerly course. Me and Martha had become friends over my other trips. But anyway, she invited me to a picnic at her family farm, which is a place called Pluto. And it was a beautiful day in April, and we ate fried chicken and drank red wine under this tree full of songbirds. And then she drove me down the levee past this cypress brake and showed me this beautiful old house sitting at the end of a cotton field with the Yazoo River next to it, and fruit trees and vegetable gardens, and a lovely front porch. And I was like, my God, what a beautiful house. And she said, that's my daddy's house, it's for sale. I said, how much? And she said, you could probably pick it up for $130. It's on 9 acres of land. I was like, I'd never really seen a house I wanted to live in before, let alone one that I could conceivably afford. I mean, they don't hardly let you park in New York for that kind of money. So then Martha said, well, you should buy. She basically talked me into buying the house and says, you can get a book out of it. This is an interesting place, the Mississippi Delta. So I went back to New York, drove back to New York, and then came an act of salesmanship. Now, honey, I know this sounds crazy, but I think we need to move from 8th Avenue and 25th Street to a place called Pluto in Mississippi, a state that you've never set foot in, but have heard many bad things about. Population of Pluto is 7. It's about 35 miles to the nearest grocery store. There's a lot of mosquitoes. There's alligators. And to her credit, well, this also reflected the kind of our desperately unhappy time in New York. She agreed to take a look at the place, and as I had, she fell in love with this old house, and she really liked Martha, and we just decided to take the plunge and buy the place, and really had no idea what we were getting into. I can't overstate how ignorant we were. Total, and we couldn't tell her, we didn't know what a cotton seedling was. We had no idea. I knew a little bit about Oxford, but that Delta culture, as you all know, is a very different entity. And just began with this sense of unreality that we lived in this place, and this just massive culture shock. I mean, I remember getting the local newspaper, the Yazoo Herald, and we both stared at the photograph on the front cover, because where I come from, in England, women don't shoot deer with pink arrows to promote breast cancer awareness. It's just it's just not something that our women do. But here on the front cover of the Yazoo Herald was a proud huntress holding up a buck that she'd shot with a pink arrow because Breast Cancer Awareness Month coincides with bow season. Conveniently enough for the pink camo brigade. So I remember staring at that and thinking, whoa. And at the same time, there were these announcements on the TV and in the newspapers that motorists should not stop for police because bad guys were impersonating police officers on the Delta roads and robbing motorists. But this was never rescinded. They never told you when it was okay to stop for police again. About 3 months afterwards, a cop tried to flag me down. I just went right around him. Yeah, these newspapers were wonderful. Big hungry woman found wandering in woods. I was like, my God. I was feeling sorry for her already, you know. Picture this kind of large, heavy-set gal stumbling around in the swamps. You know, she's been out there for hours, just getting hungry, she doesn't have any food. And then I read down, and there's a community named Big Hungry, so that was the big hungry woman. But then I started thinking again. It's like, well, we're in the state with the biggest obesity problem in America. Maybe she is a big woman, and I'm sure she got hungry wandering around in the woods out there. So it was really a great headline, I thought. And it's just there the making sense of the news, and that was a big part of it. And then just. I mean, the most difficult thing for us to understand was the way that race relations worked in that place, in the Delta as a whole, and just in Pluto, because, you know, this white and black family had lived together for 3-4 generations, not in an equal relationship, but in a close relationship. And in bygone generations, the black family had named their children after the kind of matriarch and patriarch of the white family. But now that process had gone in reverse, and now you had the white people were naming their children after the matriarch and patriarch of the black family. So there was closeness, there was love, there was respect, but they still found it hard to sit down and have a meal together, and that seemed strange to me. And I began to try to unpick these different layers of race relations, these different nuances. I found it very, very hard to come to any sort of generalization about race relations in the Delta. They went down so deep and were so tangled up, and every time I thought I was getting on a handle on it, it was like grabbing smoke. I'd reach for the smoke and grab it, and it would just melt through my fingers, and you know, I would be back to square one again. That was one of the hardest things to get to know, was the way that race worked there. You know, obviously it's a national issue, but has a very local expression, I think, in the Delta. And my method for the book was just, I carried around these. I always had a kind of a black notebook and a pen, and whenever I just came across something that caught my eye, I would write a description of it. You know, there were so many interesting conversations and so many stories that one heard, and I would keep track of them, and I look through about 7 or 8 local newspapers every day and try to get to know the place that way. And you know, I was kind of really welcomed in as a novelty item, frankly. There weren't any other Englishmen living in the Mississippi Delta. I don't think there still are, but so I was a curiosity, and I think that probably helped me in the black community as well. I remember being in a little kind of juke joint bar near my house. I would go in with my friend Monk, and somebody gave him a hard time for bringing a white man in the place, and he said, "He's not white, he's from London, England." Which it actually didn't work as well as I hoped, but so then my publisher started cracking the whip and said, well, you know, we need to get a book. And I thought, I've only been here a year. This is a difficult place to understand. I need more time. And they said, you're not getting any more time. In fact, we need this book in 6 months. And I normally take over a year to write a book, but so I kind of panicked myself into action. And I had this little studio next to the house, and And I had all my notebooks there, and I had my newspaper cuttings, and I had whatever was in my head. And I would go in there to write, and I would also have to go in there with a can of bug spray and a fly swat and a .22 rifle and a sharp garden hoe, because we were way out in the country, and snakes would get in there. I remember one, and I got up at just before dawn and went out there in the flashlight across the yard, and I get into my studio, and I turn on the computer and I sit down. There's this big crashing noise behind me. There's about a 5-foot snake had fallen off a shelf and knocked down a glass on the floor and a glass jar full of sugar. And so my day as a writer began with dispatching this snake with a garden hoe. Not something I had to do with any of my other books. But anyway, I did the best I could with the time I had to make sense of the place. And you know, one of the kids at the high school this morning said, "Well, what were your purposes in writing this book?" And you know, number one was, if I don't write, we don't eat. You know, I get paid by the word. I survive on sentences. So that was obviously the driving priority. And second, I wanted to kind of dissolve these clumsy stereotypes that a lot of Americans hold about Mississippi, that it's just to be dismissed as, you know, a kind of disaster zone. I wanted to show the rest of America that this was a deep, rich, interesting culture, that there was a lot of big-hearted people here, that there was incredible generosity and hospitality along with all the problems, and that it was much more complicated than the rest of the country gave it credit for. And then I was also just hoping to kind of hold up a mirror to Mississippi and show people here what it looked like from an outside perspective. You know, when you live in a place, everything becomes normal in the end, and you know, people also live in denial about a lot of things, or take things for granted, that maybe lose track of how special things are. So I would say those were my three purposes in writing the book. And it's just been, I think my most uncomfortable moment was, I got an advance copy of the book and I gave it to the Thompson family, who lived on Pluto and had adopted us. Thoroughly adopted us. We'd become very close, even though we held fairly different political views. And I'd been honest in my book, and I'd tried to be as honest and clear-eyed as possible, rather than trying to be nice to my friends. So I had a very, very uncomfortable weekend while they read it. And then Kathy Thompson called me on the Monday morning, and she said, "Richard, I've read your book." I said, "I didn't like some of the things you said about me, but they're all true." She said, "I think the book's wonderful, and Louis does too." That was such a relief. You know, and the reception that the book has got was just a massive surprise. I mean, I was just relieved to make my deadline, and I thought it was a kind of an obscure book about some guy that shows up in a place he doesn't really understand and tries to come to grips with it and says a few things about race. I didn't see why anyone would care about such a book. I assumed it would, you know, just kind of fall out of the publisher's window at midnight and die on the street outside. It's been incredibly gratifying to find that so many Mississippians like the book. And a lot of people have said that I've got a lot of things right, and that was really, really gratifying. Another question I get asked is, you know, will I stay in Mississippi? Am I just here to get a book out of it and move on? And again, we return to this woman, Kathy Thompson, of Pluto. She's a labor and delivery nurse in Jackson. We got married on the back deck of her house. We had our wedding reception there, and then she delivered our daughter Isabel, who was born 2 years ago. And ever since then, Kathy has referred to Isabel as her granddaughter. And Isabel calls her Nana. And we had to sell the house on Pluto and move to Jackson, but we've got a very, very strong emotional, familial connection with the Thompson family. And there are many reasons why I want to stay in Mississippi, but that's number one. I would hate to break that bond between Isabel and Kathy. And yeah, we have our own room at the Thompson house, and Isabel goes out there for weekends, and we're going to go away for 10 days. Isabel will stay with Kathy for 10 days. She is a grandmother to that child, and it's a wonderful thing. Best reason to stay. I'm gonna leave it there, and if anybody's got questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Apparently here's one in the front.
Hey, Chandler.
Thank you for coming. Number 2, thank you for your book. Number 3, thank you for, on behalf of the Avant-Garde Brigade here, thank you for breaking the crack whore barrier, because that was a real first, I think, for Tupelo Reads.
Oh, yeah.
But also, I think some people know the answer to this room, but as an outsider, an objective observer, you might be able to explain this. You mentioned a lot about Oxford and its kind of place as a place of respite and healing for you. Have you been to Starkville, Mississippi? And if so, can you compare and contrast the two?
I've got a fire ant nest you can step into right here. I have been to Starkville, and I'm not getting drawn into any comments on the Oxford Starkville situation, nor on the NFL. I mean, it's been received best in the southeast, but its fame has crept outwards a little bit. The only really hostile review that I've had was from a guy in Vermont who posted an angry review on Amazon. He's saying, "I can't believe this book is being sold as non-fiction. These people clearly couldn't exist in real life. The author has made up all his characters out of whole cloth." There's nothing to be done with folks like that.
I have to speak to that. I'm Dale Simmons. I know most of you here. I'm from Yazoo City, Mississippi. Grew up there, good friends.
Half hills, half delta, all crazy. That's what they say, right?
Ended up here in Northeast Mississippi and grateful. But your book, I read it right after you wrote it, and makes me want to cry. You were right on.
Thank you.
You did an excellent job, and I know most of the people, the characters in that book, are friends of mine or acquaintances. Sambo Olden. There are just so many wonderful characters. Willie Morris's mother was my piano teacher, and his English teacher was my English teacher and my father's English teacher. But that whole area, and where are you? Ann Milam, she grew up on the outskirts of that area, and I know she will say the same thing that I have to say today, but you did an excellent job, and thank you for putting us, Pluto and Yazoo City and all the Delta, on the map. We appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, thank you.
What was the biggest surprise you had when you moved to the Delta?
The biggest surprise? Well, the whole thing was just a gigantic surprise. Okay, so the second night that we were in the house, this woman, Kathy Thompson, I keep talking about, she came over with her husband, Louis, and her daughter, Katie, to kind of welcome us. And they brought over a couple of bottles of wine and a large selection of firearms to shoot. And so we drank the wine and shotguns, and Kathy looked through this big house and saw how little furniture we had. We'd come out of this tiny apartment in New York. And then a couple of days later, she showed up with 2 pickup trucks fully loaded with furniture for us. She had beds, she had a dining room table, she had a kitchen table, she had armchairs, wingback chairs, 2 couches. And she just moved all this stuff into her house and told us that it was our furniture for as long as we needed it or wanted it. That was astonishing. And then to cap it all off, she gave us the keys to a car. Said, "You're going to need a second car out here. Just think of our Envoy as your second car." I mean, that just bowled us over.
That's completely normal.
Yeah, there's a kind of hospitality is almost like a competitive sport there. Militant hospitality. Yeah. We do. I'm in regular contact with Sam Olden, who's about to turn 97, and he just devours the New York Times every morning and remembers everything in there. And then he turns to The Economist and he reads that from cover to cover. And he used to work for the CIA in Vienna in the 1940s, and he met Albert Schweitzer in the Central African Republic. He was friends with Eleanor Roosevelt. Him and Willie Morris were great friends. He was in the late 1940s. He's also an archaeology enthusiast. He was driving across central Mexico on a dirt road, and he saw another car with Mississippi plates. And he pulled over, and it was Eudora Welty, and she'd just run over a shepherd boy. And Sam helped her out of that jam, and they became lifelong friends. I mean, one of the good things that came out of my book is that the folks at Ole Miss are starting to record Sam some of his stories, because he's an incredible person. And we'll also talk you right down into the ground until your ears fill up with dirt and worms. He is a very staunch monologuist.
I'm from the Delta.
Could you repeat that?
And I want to give you my take on why the book is so successful. That is, knowing the people from the Delta. I'm the youngest of 10 children out of the Delta, so I know the Delta. The reason the book is so successful is that people in the Delta are so hungry for some kind of level playing field that they can be on with blacks and poor people. Your book gives some hope that that is possible.
That's an interesting comment. I do. It's like I feel hope for social relations in the Delta. I don't feel much hope for the economic situation. I mean, the first thing that I'm not in the solutions business, by the way. But in order for the Delta to get better, I think the first priority has got to be public education. But even then, let's say we could somehow miraculously fix public education in the Delta. I still think a lot of people would leave, because given the nature of the Delta, it's going to have an agricultural economy, and modern agriculture does not really require many human beings. It requires machines and chemicals and a line of credit at the bank and a market in China. It does not require human beings, but I can't see how the Delta's economy will ever get away from agriculture. So I see signs of hope between black and white, rich and poor. I think it's like sometimes you get into situations there where black and white are thrown together in a social situation, and they get on so well, and they know how to do it so well, just most of the time they choose not to, because of what everyone's been through in the weight of history. But I don't know how you bring back those towns. Maybe if you fix the schools, you can invite investment in and get some companies that want to be there. There's a lot of talent in the Delta. There's a lot of smart, good-hearted people trying to make things happen, but there's these big economic challenges, and I think they're difficult to solve.
Do you want to? Do you have a question?
No, we're good. Join. I have a question. Well, we've got. I think we've got time for maybe one more question before we thank Richard, then we've got one last piece of business to take care of.
Hello, first off, I want to say we loved your book. I'm fascinated with England, and my 5-year-old son's actually named London. But what I love, though, is how you have brought outsiders to Mississippi. So my question for you is, my favorite part of the book is when everyone came to the big party on the weekend at your house in Pluto. So my question is, since then, how many more people are coming on a regular basis that you have friends, you said, from all over the world, England, Germany, other parts of the U.S.? Do you think that you're impacting your friends who looked at Mississippi in a negative light and looking at it a different way?
Absolutely. I mean, I wrote about one party in that book, but there were 4 other ones. We would throw these huge. It was a great house to throw big parties because there was no neighbours. There was lots of room, and we would always have live music. There would always be feasting, and they would go on for about 2 or 3 days. And people would come from England, Germany, like New Zealand, New York, California, Arizona. But probably 75% of the people there would be from Mississippi, and there was. And also I should say, as the parties progressed, there'd be more and more black and white Mississippians together, and those parties were, they were fun, but it also felt like they mattered, like prejudices were dissolving. New Yorkers came down here, but they didn't find what they expected to find, and one of my friends from New York, he's been down here 8 times. At the Thompson's daughter Katie had a big wedding on Pluto, and she got my friend Michaela to fly over from London to photograph the wedding. She's a wedding photographer in England. So a lot of friendships were formed at those parties that have continued and persisted. And then Louis and Kathy Thompson from Pluto, they became such good friends with my New York friends that they went up there for a visit, and they kind of did their best to show New York hospitality. And then so Kathy came back and told all her friends, well, we had this great time in New York, and that's kind of not what they were expecting to hear necessarily. So I think, in a tiny way, we did make some meaningful change.
Richard, thank you. I hope you can feel the love and respect and enjoyment that we had for you being here, and it was wonderful. The book and your visit are wonderful ways for us to see how someone else that we respect sees us and how we can see ourselves. One of the things that Richard said at the high school that I was just going to share with you that I thought was particularly interesting, one of the African-American students asked him about politics and race relations, and what you said was that he learned in the Delta to compartmentalize, and that politics is only about 1/10 of what somebody is about, and that you could just have a person that you disagreed with absolutely on politics and still respect as a person and a friend too. I thought it was good for the students to hear that, and it was good for us to hear that too. This has been the conclusion of a great week. Before you go, though, Jeff and Becky, I think you all have a presentation. Richard will be signing books at the table over here with Jane Riley afterwards if you brought your book and would like it signed, or if you'd like to buy one, we have some there. So he'll stay as long as you want to stay and meet him and have your book signed. But Jeff, Becky, you have a microphone? Or?
I don't need a microphone.
Okay, there we go.
Thanks, Jeff. Again, thank you so much. It was wonderful. It was great meeting you, and your book was wonderful. I've told you that twice now.
I believe you.
Okay. And Tupelo Reads. Let's give another hand for Tupelo Reads. Are so happy to be part to give money to Tupelo Reads so we can bring in great people like that. So today, the Friends of the Library would like to present a check to the Lee County Library for $24,000. out books. So we're very, very happy to raise money. So today, we would like to announce our 4th annual Novel Affair, March 9th, write it down, 2018. And we are going to have chef, restaurateur, Elizabeth High School, and she is out of Oxford, and she's the proclaimed debutante farmer. She has a book coming out October 17th, a new book that is called, I wrote it down, What Can I Bring? Southern Food for Any Occasion Life Gives You. And I have to tell a quick story about this because I moved to Mississippi 4.5 years ago, and
I've learned quite a bit. So, but as I was leaving, I taught school. A 5th grade student walked up to me and she said, "You're moving to Mississippi?" And I said, "Yes, I am." She goes, "Well, my mama said that you have to have this book." And it just so happened it was cornbread. It was somebody stole the cornbread from my dressing, and it just so happened to be her that was the author of the book. So I thought, when I met her the other day, I said, I have to tell you this story. I said, this little girl, and she signed it to Miss Rollins, "I will miss you so much, love, Haley." And I thought, this was meant to be. So mark your calendars, come out March 9th, a novel affair, and help us raise money so we can give $24,000 back to the library to have people come and speak to us and have you have a great library. Thanks so much. And if you're not a friend of the library, before Jeff says you can leave, if you're not a friend of the library, I have little cards here if you can become a friend of the library. I have them. I keep them in my purse, so you can have one. Okay, thanks so much. Here's Jeff.
Okay, thank you all for coming. We do have books for sale, and the author will be signing them. Thank you.
All right, good job. Good job.